See, here's the thing. Without the Petrine element, without the element of Peter, the church would separate. It would fall into its component parts. It would devolve into a cantankerous debating society. That's why the Petrine office, up and down the centuries, has been so important for the integrity of the church and its structure, its identity. So there's the Petrine side. But Peter embraces Paul. The two belong together. Because Paul represents a balancing archetype in the life of the church, namely theology, speculation, evangelization, the engagement of the culture, the missionary impulse. Think of Paul on the move. Paul establishing churches, but not staying to lead them. That'd be more of a Petrine office. Paul would establish them through his evangelization, then he would move on. He'd write letters back to them to direct them, but his main task was to move around the Roman world and to engage the culture, to argue, to write, to theologize. In fact, Paul clearly is the first great theologian in the life of the church, the first one to practice this subtle art of faith-seeking understanding. Peter and Paul together gives the church its energy and impetus and life, integrity and creativity, if you want to put it that way. John Henry Newman talks about the development of doctrine. Doctrine remains substantially itself, yes, but it develops over time. That means it unfolds, it displays its different aspects, new profiles emerge, and that happens through the play of lively minds. So doctrine is not like a football that we simply pass dumbly from one generation to another. Doctrine rather is entertained in this play of lively minds and through the ongoing conversation in the life of the church. That's the Pauline element that gives the church its kind of verve and energy and creativity that makes it relevant to different generations up and down the centuries. Now, to be sure, without the Petrine element, the Pauline element will run amok, and the church will simply, again, devolve into a debating society. It'll become a sort of philosophical discussion group. What the Pauline element needs is the Petrine element for order, but the Petrine element needs the Pauline, lest the church, this is Newman again, become petrified. It becomes stony and lifeless. Peter and Paul embracing one another, that's the model for the church. When they're kept in their proper relationship, when Peter and Paul, as we see in the icons, embrace, then the church is dynamically alive.
Our Holy Father's homily. We are celebrating Peter and Paul, two apostles in love with the Lord, two pillars of the faith of the church. As we reflect on their lives, today's gospel sets before us the question that Jesus posed to his disciples. Who do you say that I am? This is the most essential and important question of all. Who is Jesus for me? Who is Jesus in my life? Let us see how the two apostles answered that question. Peter's answer can be summed up in one word: follow. Peter knew that it was to follow the Lord. On that day in Caesarea Philippi, Peter responded to Jesus' question with a fine profession of faith. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. An impeccable, precise, exact, and we could even say perfect catechetical answer. Yet that answer was itself the fruit of a journey. For only after the thrilling experience of following the Lord, walking with him, and behind him for some time, did Peter arrive at the spiritual maturity that brought him, by grace, to so clear a profession of the faith. The same evangelist, Matthew, tells us that it all began one day when beside the Sea of Galilee, Jesus walked by, called Peter and his brother Andrew, and immediately they left their nets and followed him. Jesus left everything behind to follow the Lord. The gospel stresses that he did so immediately. Peter did not tell Jesus that he would think it over. He didn't calculate the pros and cons. He didn't come up with alibis to postpone the decision. Instead, he left his nets and followed Jesus without demanding any kind of guarantee beforehand. He was to learn everything day by day as a disciple, a follower of Jesus, following in his footsteps. It's not by chance that in the Gospels, the last recorded words of Jesus to Peter were, "Follow me." Peter tells us that it's not enough to respond to the question, "Who is Jesus for me?" with a faultless doctrinal formula or a set of preconceived notions. No. So only by following the Lord that we come to know him each day. Only by becoming his disciples and listening to his words that we become his friends and experience his transforming love. That word immediately is also meaningful for us. Many other things can be postponed in life, but not following Jesus. Where he is concerned, we cannot hesitate or come up with excuses. We need to be careful, too, because some excuses are disguised as spiritual. As, for example, when we say, "I'm not worthy, I don't have it in me, what can I do?" This is one of the ploys of the devil. It robs us of trust in God's grace by making us think that everything depends on our own abilities. To detach ourselves from all earthly forms of security immediately and follow Jesus anew each day. Such is the charge that Peter sets before us today. He invites us to be a church that follows, a church that follows, a church that strives to be a disciple of the Lord, a lowly servant of the gospel. Only in this way will the church be capable of dialoguing with everyone and becoming a place of accompaniment, closeness, and hope for the men and women of our time. Only in this way will those farthest from us, those who often regard us with diffidence or indifference, come to realize, in the words of Pope Benedict, that the church is the place of our encounter with the Son of the living God, and thus the place for our encounter with one another. So now we come to the Apostle of the Gentiles. If the word to describe Peter's answer was follow, for Paul, it is proclaim, to preach the gospel. For Paul, too, everything began with grace, with the Lord's prior initiative. On the road to Damascus, as he led a fierce persecution of Christians, barricaded in his religious convictions, the risen Jesus met him and blinded him by his light. Or better, thanks to that light, Paul came to realize how blind he had been. Caught up in the pride of his rigid observance, he discovered in Jesus the fulfillment of the mystery of salvation. In comparison with the sublime knowledge of Christ, he came to regard all his formal human and religious securities as rubbish. Paul then devoted his life to traversing land and sea, cities and towns, taking no account of privations and persecutions, for the sake of preaching Jesus Christ. Looking at Paul's life, it almost seems that the more he preached the gospel, the more he grew in the knowledge of Jesus. By preaching the word to others, he was able to peer more deeply into the depths of God's mystery. Paul could then write, "Woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel." He could then confess, "To me, life is Christ." Paul then tells us that our answer to the question, Who is Jesus for me is not a privatized piety that leaves us peaceful and unconcerned about bringing the gospel to others. The apostle teaches us that we grow in faith and in knowledge of the mystery of Christ when we preach and bear witness to him before others. This is always the case. Whenever we evangelize, we are ourselves evangelized. This is an experience of every day. When we evangelize, we ourselves are evangelized. The word that we bring to others comes back to us. For however much we give to others, we ourselves receive much more. And this is something necessary also for the church in our day, to put preaching at the center, to be a church that never tires of repeating, "For me to live is Christ, and woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel." A church that needs to preach, even as we need oxygen to breathe. A church that cannot live without sharing with others the embrace of God's love and the joy of the gospel. Brothers and sisters, we are celebrating Peter and Paul. They answered that essential question in life, the fundamental question of life: who is Jesus for me? By following him as disciples and by proclaiming the gospel. It's good for us to grow as a church in the same way, by following the Lord, constantly and humbly seeking him out. It's good for us to become a church that is also outgoing, finding joy not in things of the world, but in preaching the gospel before the world, and sowing in people's hearts the presence of God. Bring the Lord Jesus everywhere, with humility and joy, in our city of Rome, in our families, in our relationships and our neighborhoods, in civil society, in the church and political life, in the whole world, especially in those places where poverty, decay, and marginalization are deeply rooted. And today, a number of our brother archbishops received the pallium, a side of communion with the Church of Rome. To them I would say, be apostles like Peter and Paul. Be disciples in following and apostles in preaching. Bring the beauty of the gospel everywhere, together with all the people of God. And finally, I'd like to address an affectionate greeting to you, to the delegation of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, sent here by my very dear brother, His Holiness Bartholomew. Thank you for your presence. Thank you. May we advance together in following and in preaching the word as we grow in fraternity. May Peter and Paul accompany us and intercede for us. The homily of our Holy Father will pause for a brief moment of silence. As you heard there, the Holy Father greeted the ecumenical delegation sent by the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, and led by Archbishop Job of Pisidia.
Unity in diversity, an invitation for today's world. We can clearly see that Peter and Paul represent different but complementary aspects of the church. Peter symbolizes stability, tradition, and hierarchy. Paul brings renewal, creativity, and a strong missionary spirit. One gathers while the other eagerly goes forth, but both share the same noble mission to bear witness to the risen Christ. In today's world context, where differences in culture, perspectives, politics, or religion sometimes cause division, the image of Saint Peter and Saint Paul becomes a meaningful invitation. They show us that unity in diversity is not only possible, but also a gift and a mission. For each Catholic, these true saints remind us that the Church is a living community where everyone has a place and is invited to contribute. And for non-Catholics, their lives are a powerful testimony. None of us is perfect, but if we open our hearts, anyone can be transformed and embark on a journey of love, service, and hope. And on this feast day of the true apostles, each of us, especially the young people, is invited to answer the question that Jesus posed. But who do you say that I am? It is also a content of the final part, call and sent. That answer lies not only in words, but must be demonstrated through how we live. Today's world desperately needs people with unwavering faith like Peter. In a society where moral values are eroding, we need people with firm belief in the truth. Just as Peter boldly proclaimed, "You are the Christ." The world needs people who dare to stand up for their faith, and the world also yearns for people who passionately commit themselves to justice and truth like Paul. Witnessing so much injustice and deceit, we need people with passionate hearts who dare to defend the vulnerable. Following St. Paul's example, we are called to become pioneers, bringing the light of truth to places of darkness. Saints Peter and Paul, two lives that seem opposite, but together built the church on the foundation of faith and love for Christ. In a world thirsting for meaning, truth, and love, the lives of these true saints are an urgent invitation. Have the courage to live for God and for our brothers and sisters. Like them, each of us can become quiet yet strong pillars for the church today and in the future. Thank you for listening. May St. Peter and Paul intercede for all of us.
We say that the church is Roman because of Peter. The church is Catholic because of Paul. The two marks of the church, unity and universality. The church is one, the church is Catholic. But the church is one because of Peter. We're united in the truth because he has that charism of truth. The church is universal because of Paul. He was the apostle to the Gentiles. And there are many truths that the world accepts, but there are also many politically incorrect truths that the world will not accept. But the church preaches those truths in season and out of season. They say if the Catholic Church doesn't teach what the Catholic Church teaches, who will teach it?